All right, folks, welcome to the Culture and People Cast. Today we have Eimear Marinin. Eimear, in a few sentences, would you tell us who you are and what you do?
Yes, of course. So first of all, thank you so much, Anna, for having me today. So just like you said, my name is Eimear, and I'm actually coming to you from my kids' playroom in Dublin, in Ireland. So before anything, I'm a mom of two smallies, Evine, who is 4, and Fia, who is 2. And I'm director of culture at Hubspot. And Hubspot is a leading customer relationship management platform, or CRM for short, that provides software and support to help businesses grow better. And at HubSpot, we're culture obsessed, so much so that we've published an external HubSpot culture code, which has been downloaded or viewed more than 5 million times. So definitely check that out. And my job really is to bring that culture code to life. So to enable our culture, help engage our employees through programming and experiences, and just to build a company culture that really empowers people to do their best work.
Oh, these culture jobs, these head of people, all of these things that are focused more on humanity, right? And how it feels to live in these places makes my heart so happy to see. So you've been in this space for a while. Eimear, what is your favorite part of this work?
It's such a good question, and actually a really hard one. If I'm being honest, I think it's having a direct impact on people's growth and honestly, people's lives, both personally and professionally. Like we touched a little bit upon this earlier, but I think now more than ever, employees want to work somewhere and be part of a culture that they truly believe in, and one that really excites them. Now that obviously our home life and our work life are so blended. And so being part of that, and also hearing those personal stories that you hear from employees around the way culture impacted them, or interactions that they had with their own team, people that are caring for kids or elderly parents in the midst of COVID-19, how people rallied around and supported that. And seeing that really come to life through culture, I think is just something that is wonderful in every way.
Yeah, it's so good to honor that, right? Eimear, that is something that if you think about how much time of your day you spend at work doing this hopefully very meaningful role that you've been given, but how can you say that the culture, the work that you're doing doesn't affect you as a person? It completely does.
It
Right.
completely does. And I think it is all of those interactions. It is all of those behavioral exchanges. It's your day to day. It's how you show up, and it's how other people show up for you and to you, that really is a testament to how healthy your culture is. And if you don't have that, that's really hard, especially in a world where right now you log off a call and you're on your own in a room with no one to talk to. And it's really hard to coach yourself. So having that strong culture, I think, like I said, especially now, is just so important.
Yes. And because of that increased, let's say, isolation or potentially even loneliness, right? I'm hearing from leaders that engaging talent is a challenge. Eimear, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that is, again, a tough one. And I honestly think you have to ask yourself the reason why it is a challenge. And actually, are you focusing on the right thing? So, if we were trying to engage employees in the same way as we did a year ago, we would definitely have a big problem. And I think where so many leaders and organizations are falling down right now is assuming without asking. To drive true engagement, you actually have to be willing to listen to your employees, be empathetic to their current situation, and then be willing to act on their feedback. It's one thing to plan, but then you actually have to put that plan in place. And so constantly ask your employees, how can you improve? But then do it, and also tell your employees that you're actually doing it in the first place. Because I think a lot of the time we also don't do that.
Yeah, I'm hearing that people talk lately about really active listening, right? And going on listening tours. And I think you even posted about listening, a listening strategy with your employees, but you hit something really important on the head. Really, everybody should be listening and asking. So when I say this is going to sound negative, but if you're not going to do anything about it, don't ask. Right. Because then you're creating false hope and you don't have to do everything. Right. I mean, you're talking to when I was in inside organizations for 19 years, I was like the endless idea girl. People were like, Anna, with the ideas already. Right. So you don't have to implement all my ideas, but did they spark something? Did we do some of the idea? Could you explain to me why we weren't able to do the other ones? Right. Don't lose those people who are still so engaged that they do want to make it better.
Oh, 100%. I think, we've all been there. It is the most frustrating thing where you're telling somebody the same thing over and over again, and they're listening, but they're actually not being intentional around what they need to change. And I think as leaders, especially in the people space right now, like we really do need to listen to our employees. And I think it's so funny, like we're hearing so much now about Zoom fatigue. And I think at the start, when the first, when the pandemic first hit, everybody leaned so heavily into virtual programming and going above and beyond in terms of like, global events and really trying to drive engagement that way. But what we saw is a couple of months in, engagement and impact dropped. And so actually asking people what do they want, and some of the most overwhelming feedback came from our parent and caregiver community. They didn't want to have their kids on Zoom, and actually they didn't want more Zoom. What they wanted was a little bit more of like that flexibility or like physical things that they could help with their kids. Let's help provide discussion guides on how to talk about COVID-19 with their kids. Like that was what was impactful for them. And so, an assumption of let's just put on loads of kids stuff to keep them entertained was definitely the wrong assumption. But then really making that shift and acknowledging that you've listened to your employees, like that's how you keep them engaged, I think.
Yeah, because I think there was a lift and shift that happened, right? So if you had a very meeting heavy culture where you were in back-to-back meetings and you called that collaboration or innovation, whatever, and I'm not saying that some of it wasn't, right? But what happened is they lifted and shifted that to 8 or 9 hours of back-to-back Zoom calls, which is equally as exhausting or maybe even more or different, right? Exhausting when you have to be on these little boxes and how am I supposed to use the restroom? How am I supposed to make a meal? How am I supposed to care for my kid who's running in with their iPad on Paw Patrol, right?
Totally. Exactly. Yes, exactly. Like you cannot recreate your in-office experience by just lifting and shifting. You have to be so much more intentional and thoughtful and purposeful now to really create an inclusive culture and an inclusive environment for everybody. And that's hard, but I think it's really important to acknowledge.
Yeah. Eimear, can we get really tactical? So there's somebody who's
Yes.
listening saying like, okay, yeah, I want to advance my culture. I want to get better at these remote practices. What could they implement tomorrow? What's a behavior, a process that they could start tomorrow that might help with that?
It's a good question. So I think the best advice that I could give is actually spend time thinking about the system and the roots of your culture. And is that the system? Is that the right behaviors and values that you're trying to drive? Are they the right things? Like an example, we're seeing a mass exodus from the workplace right now as a result of the pandemic. And this is disproportionately impacting women and especially Black and Latino women. I mean, we all saw in December like 140,000 people lost their job and every single one of them were women. And so something is wrong there. The people strategy and the culture of those organizations are broken. And I think quite often what we hear is that, oh, the way to solve that is to give caregivers or women maybe more time off. But if they're going to come back to a system and a culture that's broken, then you're actually not going to solve the root cause. And so should you lean into a culture of flexibility? Should you lean into a culture of empathy? Should you help drive those empathetic behaviors amongst your manager population? Build a really great community and a really great support structure. Like what really are the right things that you need to drive right now? And also acknowledging that those behaviors and values, they can evolve. Like culture should be fluid and it can evolve and it should, especially at times like this. So that's the best advice that I would say. Literally go back to basics. Think about the system and fix the system before you go and throw a load of stuff at your people and at your organization.
Yeah, and I think people, organizations, leaders that I've worked with, and this is pretty subconscious, Eimear, that I feel like there's maybe this fear of, well, if I start to act differently now, if I say what we did before wasn't good, or I start to even do something better, I'm referring that it wasn't good, then I've done something wrong. When really, I think you're doing something right by saying, like, just like a person, do you really want to act like you did when you were 15? Or 25 or 35 or
I love
whatever.
that.
No, we want to say like we're smarter, we're more experienced, we've evolved, we have we're cultured, we traveled, we whatever. Like the same thing is for your culture. Like it should evolve, it has to. And right now, we've all gone through a huge shift last year. If a company is trying to act like nothing has changed except that we're going to be on Zoom most of the time, that's false.
100%. I think you'll find that it's companies that are being proactive with their culture versus just being reactive that are actually succeeding. And I think it is being super agile and adaptable as an organization right now that is the most important. I mean, I definitely wasn't the same literally a year ago. I certainly have a lot more gray hairs than I do now than I did a year ago, but like we all evolve. And I also think it's the most empowering thing to hear from leaders that actually we have made mistakes and maybe our culture wasn't what it was meant to be. Like we all make mistakes. And so what a wonderful way then to kind of lead from the top and show that that's okay to admit to your people.
You cannot be too Pollyanna, right? Like, oh, everything's fine. We have everything
Oh
figured
my
out.
God.
We don't have very
Yes.
much figured out right now, right? We don't know when the pandemic's ending. We don't know how work's going to look. We don't have much figured out. So just say
Yeah.
that, right?
Just say
Yeah.
that. Yeah, exactly. That
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Thank you, Eimear. Okay. So two quick questions. Last one. So the
Yes.
first one is, who would you shout out? Who else is doing great work in the ring around culture and people, either as
Yes.
just a shout out or a potential guest? And I know we both love Darren Murphy. He's our culture crush.
I know, our hashtag culture crush, Darren, if you're listening. So before I was with HubSpot, I worked at LinkedIn for a while, and I do think LinkedIn are awesome from a culture perspective, and they are doing some really cool things. I think especially actually Rosanna Doruthi is the head of DIMB there, and is just doing some great work around creating a culture that is truly inclusive and where everybody can feel like they belong. And so that's somebody that comes to mind. I'd mentioned Lynn. Lynn Oldham is CHRO from Zoom. I think she is incredibly interesting because Zoom are such a such a fundamental part of our culture right now, and so seeing how Zoom is actually evolving internally while their product becomes, part of everything that we do right now is so interesting. And then I think the only other person actually that came to mind is Professor Dr. Robert Livingston. I listened into a conversation with him recently, and he is doing a lot of work, and he's recently written a book around how to radically transform individuals and organizations by speaking the truth about racism. And I think especially in the world that we live in today, seeing how he is encouraging that change and encouraging those conversations and bringing that into your culture, I think is so important. So he is awesome and someone I definitely recommend.
I'm all about that. I'm adding the book for sure. And I will
Yes,
certainly look into Dr. Robert Livingston. Thank you for those suggestions.
all
How about
good.
resources for you? Other people, podcast reading, what has evolved your own thinking about culture and people?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, I'm going to go rogue because I was really reflecting on this. I think, being brutally honest, it actually is speaking to a lot of different people from different perspectives and backgrounds, people that do not look like me and do not think like me. Because in my role, if I'm trying to influence company culture, I can't do it from just my perspective. And I definitely can't do it from perspectives of people who like are all Irish, are all white, are all women.
Mm,
And so that's what my favorite resource is. It's having a network where I'm listening to different perspectives, maybe perspectives that I don't even agree with. But I think that is how you really will create a strong, inclusive, and diverse culture and a company that actually people are proud to work in. And like I said, one that's inclusive to all.
that's so amazing. And I think you're dead on. I mean, this is true for any role, but especially for those of us in this people and culture space within or influencing organizations. You can't be insular, right? In your own
No,
community, right? I can't hang out with just, white females in their mid 40s. I need to expand that. And I can't also just live in the culture of the swimming pool of my organization. I have to get out and hear what other organizations are doing. What are their best practices? What can we beg, borrow, and steal from, right? Like that is how we're going to grow because otherwise it gets very homogeneous, right?
100%, especially now because we're experiencing this for the first time, and there is no company like shifting to a hybrid that we've never done this before. And so you definitely have companies like GitLab who have gone full remote, but like so many companies are for the first time ever trying to figure out hybrid and what this like mix of working looks like. And so it is so important to learn and learn from our own mistakes definitely as we go down this journey.
Yeah. So, Emer, thank you for all you're doing at HubSpot for culture and people, but also the wide world of work. I really appreciate you being a guest today, and it was a delight.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Peace and progress.